Hey, this is Greg Berger, and you are listening to the GeekCast Radio Network.
Hello and welcome to episode 191 of the Cinema Geeks. I am one of your Cinema Geeks, OptimusSolo, and joining me for today's record is none other than MovieRevolt. Dan, hello.
Hey, how's it going?
Not too shabby. And joining us, as he has for most of these countdowns for our decade look, is none other than DJ Valentine from Simplistic Reviews. Hello, DJ.
A lot of people are going to die on this list. So high body count. This list might have the highest body count of any movie list we've done ever.
And now I feel like I'm not prepared because I don't have the kill counts for each movie
listed
in front of me. So people are going to be let down. For you guys' information for today, we are actually going to interesting list today because we've done single lists up to this point. We've done like the top 10 action films of the last decade, top 10 comedies, sci-fi, comic book, et cetera, et cetera. We're doing a kind of a combination of two different genres in one today. So we're going to give you our top 10 both war/Western films of the last decade. So one thing that'll be interesting to see is if there are more war films listed or more Western films listed. I thought, when we were tossing this around, Dan, I thought that makes sense, because it seems like you might get one or two war films a year at the most. We're lucky if we get like one decent Western a year, it seems like. And I'm like, well, that makes sense to try to like combine these. And then I went through the practice of trying to make my list, and I easily had enough for probably a top 10 of each one on its own. It just wouldn't have been quite as good, but man, it was tough coming up with this. For me, it was tougher to come up with the Westerns that were going to make my list. The war ones were a little bit more defined, but Dan, how was your process of coming up with this kind of combined list?
Yeah, it's interesting because I think I'm the opposite. I think I don't know in the sense of I think I have more Westerns on my list. Like I knew those right away. And I think also what's kind of hard too with war films, it's like there are movies that take place during a war, is that technically a war movie?
Right.
So there's ones that I originally had on that I took off. So I really just ones that are focusing on like military combat in a way.
Right.
So, and I also didn't include documentaries because I feel like that's something separately because there's been a lot of great documentaries that center on war. Or the fallout of war or things like that. So I didn't include any of those. But yeah, I was actually surprised how many, like, again, it wasn't, not as many comedies or as many comic book films, but like movie for movie, I'm pretty impressed by this list overall in the sense of the quality. Like I really love pretty much every movie on this list. And I think, I'm not saying we're seeing a resurgence of Western films, but it does seem like we're seeing a lot of different takes on them. And for more updated versions of them to, you're seeing a lot of, and we'll probably talk about a number of like high profile directors that are putting their stamp on it. But I was actually surprised. I kind of went into thinking I'd have more military movies or that would be easier. But that one I didn't have as much or struggled with a little bit more.
I guess what I meant when I said like it was harder for me with the Western films was because like my Western, like if I was picking like movies that I'm real confident in and like feel really good about listing today, I had 10 Westerns I could have listed that I would have felt real good about. And for war, I had like maybe 5 that I would have felt real good about listing. So it was harder for me because I wanted to include more Westerns than I could. The war films, it was a little bit easier for me to pick and choose. I actually didn't realize I did this, but I have all of the ones that I was considering listed, obviously, on a spreadsheet like I always do. And I wrote down like what ranking they had for each year they came out when I did my year-end lists. And as it turns out, and I didn't do this intentionally, but the 10 that made my list today were all in a top 10 the year they came out for me overall. The ones that didn't make my top 10 on those years ended up not making this list either. So I guess I somewhat stayed true to my rankings a little bit without even knowing it. So DJ, how is it for you to come up with this list? I know you are like the most efficient and like like definitive person to come up with a list. Like it's incredible.
You know me. When you ask me a list, it takes me maybe 5 minutes, maybe.
I'm like, hey DJ, do you want to do this? And he's like, I'm done.
Yeah, I'm like, I think about it because I mean, you asked me, luckily, and I'm grateful to be on a lot of shows where it's stuff that I'm super interested in that I've already probably walked around or drove around thinking, you know what, this is my number one, and this is my two. So when you ask me, like, yeah, I've already done this, like years ago. I already
got in my head. I've done this
already. I've been on this show in my head already. This is not this, but no, this was the first time where I had to go back and make a cut because I had one. I had two that were vying to be in the spot. So I was like, let me watch these again.
I remember you tweeting about that. Yeah.
Right. I wasn't sure. I was like, let me watch this again because I don't know who wins here. And then I watch them again. I'm like, yeah, this one wins. But everything else, like my top out of the 10, like 9 of them I knew already. It was just essentially moving them in the spots that I wanted them to be in.
What he's not telling you guys is not only did I like ask him to do the list, and then like 5 minutes later he said he had it finished, but then like he just said he rewatched 2 movies. I'm pretty sure he rewatched those movies like within like 4 hours of when I asked him to do the list.
Yeah, I watched them back to back.
It was like, do you want to do this list? And he back to back like binged 2 movies and finished his list. I love it. Yeah, so we're just gonna be going around the table. We'll be talking about our 10s and then 9s, etc., as we make our way towards the ones. If we have some crossover, we might bounce a little bit out of order, but that's kind of how we'll do this. And then towards the end, we'll talk about any movies that just didn't quite make the cut. DJ, you are the guest of honor, so we're going to let you go first. So what is your number 10 war or Western film of the last decade?
This is one of 2. I don't want to say they're cheats. They're not cheats. They're modern day Westerns. So my number 10 is Wind River. Nice. It's a movie, and Taylor Sheridan does this a lot, that reminds you that even though it is modern day, the West is still out there. The mindset, the danger, the ambiguous justice still there. And this is before WandaVision. Elizabeth plays Elizabeth Olsen. This is before she now is one of the biggest stars in Hollywood at this point. Plays like a young FBI agent from, ironically, Fort Lauderdale, which is like 5 feet from where I live. Trying to discover the killer of a young girl on an Indian reservation with the help of a hunter played by Jeremy Renner. There is another actor in the film who might show back up on my list, named Gil Birmingham.
Love him.
He's in damn near every Taylor Sheridan project. He's on Yellowstone. And when I was rewatching this film maybe last week, it wasn't the same day I was doing my cuts, but I rewatched it a couple. But I was rewatching it. Whatchamacallit, and to prepare. But there's a scene between him and Renner that is so good. One father. This is not really a spoiler. It's in the trailer. One father who lost a child in the past, trying to explain to a father who just lost a child that day how life is going to be like for him from now on. And damn, it might be worth watching the entire movie for that one scene. It's so good. And this is people are here nor there on Jeremy Renner, but I think he needs to do more of this stuff because he's so freaking good in this movie. And everybody's really good in this movie, but Gil Birmingham is great. The people who show up in the movie, John Bernthal's in here for maybe 15 minutes. And he's John Bernthal. I got like a man crush on him. He's great in every freaking thing he does. But yeah, everything about it, it feels like a Western, though it's got, modern, it's set in modern day, but just everything in it is really, really good. The justice, the stuff I was talking about. So Wind River is my number 10. And I really wanted to put it higher, but I think I found 4 more Westerns that are better than it.
Right. It's interesting too, because this one's, according to Wikipedia, it's listed as a neo-Western murder mystery, which is a weird thing to think of. But it's like a modern Western, but it's like, to me, it's like half Western, half like true crime type deal. I don't know. It's like, it's weird to say this about this movie because this movie is kind of a tough watch in some ways, but it was like, for me, a breath of fresh air almost when it came to just something that I hadn't seen before. Like, it didn't quite fit. Like, I don't know what the closest movie is that I would compare this to, but it was riveting for me. Like, I remember really enjoying this film. Overall, it was my number 2 film the year it came out, which was 2017. That's how much I enjoyed it. Like, made it all the way up there for my year-end list. So I am in complete agreement. I don't know. Like, I don't know if I classify it as a Western first, but like, it fits in this list, so I would rank it as well. So
I think it has the elements. It
yeah.
has the showdowns. It has the long anticipation. So yeah, and Jeremy Renner's wearing a cowboy hat. So yeah, there you go.
And Gil's in it, so he's
Gilbert,
that I count as Western. So yeah, I love this pick. So I will go with my number 10 next, which is interesting because I, as I do with most of these lists, just for kind of fun and trivia bits or whatever, I try to like gather top 10 lists from around the internets and see how they have people ranked and whatnot. And according to Screen Rant, this was war film of the last decade. According to Cinemaholic, it was number 1. According to Cinema Spotlight, it was number 1. So I guess I'm off by having it here at my number 10 film in this cross genre work. But I just had a couple other films that I feel like were better than it in the war category, but I think it's still worthy of a mention. So I might have it too low according to a lot of people, but this is where I'm slotting in Dunkirk at my number 10. The reason I think Dunkirk works so well for me specifically is it's almost like we have all of these other films that we've been seeing over the year that, over that decade that might be considered war films, but there are a lot of different types of war films. Like, we got a lot of modern style war films. I feel like it's almost hard to even call them war, because like when we think of war, at least I feel like when our generation thinks of like war films, we think of like big time combat films, and obviously modern warfare is a lot different. So yeah, you'll hear with a lot of my honorable mentions more stuff that's happened in the last X number of years, and I feel like this was a return to like that Saving Private Ryan type deal that we had gone, it seems like, a while without seeing. And I know there was a lot of anticipation with it being a Christopher Nolan film as well. I just think it was done rather well. It had a lot of the elements that were kind of traditional war film elements that worked for me. I don't really have anything negative to say about it. I guess the only reason it doesn't quite get as high as the other war films that I'll be listing today is from an emotional standpoint. It just didn't quite move me as much as some of the other ones. I'm not saying it's not an emotional film, but it didn't quite tug at my heartstrings as much as the other films I'll still mention. But I'm not trying to take away from it. It was just according, kind of looking at what we just did. Wind River was my number 2 of 2017. Dunkirk was number 33 of 2017. So it wasn't quite as high as the rest of them, but I still think it's worthy of a mention. Dan, any thoughts on Wind River, Dunkirk, or your number 10?
I actually forgot all about Wind River because when I was doing my list. I did it through Letterboxd, and for some reason they don't qualify that as a Western. But if they did, I'd probably. I don't know if I would make it, but I do really love that movie. All I can think about is that like shootout near the end, and just the brutality of it. It's intense. And like was mentioned, like Jeremy Renner, that might be outside of maybe The Town, one of his better performances. And I'll save my thoughts for Dunkirk for later, for now. But my number 10 again is maybe another one which might be higher on some other people's list. Again, like I said, this is just a really strong list overall. But it's The Revenant from 2015 by Iñárritu. And to be honest, like Iñárritu's films are ones that often don't work for me a great deal. Like I dislike Babel. Birdman didn't really click for me. 21 Grams, I did not enjoy. I find them often to be a chore to get through. But I felt The Revenant, it was a chore, but in a good way. And I mean, obviously watching it, you can see Leonardo DiCaprio just trying everything possible to get his Oscar. Like the physical toll he put him through. And I know it was notoriously like the horrible thing to shoot, and like how awful it was for all the crew. But I think as a movie, it is quite good, and it is like it's Iñárritu at his best. Like there are so many phenomenons within this, and again, great performances, and of course, Infinite Bear Attack. I guess you could maybe not qualify it as a Western per se, because it doesn't necessarily have a lot of the tropes. It's not necessarily taking place, in a Western like atmosphere, but I do think like the idea of the frontier is certainly there, which was a big part of the West as well. So yeah, that's why it's really my number 10. It's just impressive performances, a brutal film like to make and to watch, and probably again, it's just something I was surprised I enjoyed as much as I did. Based upon my experience with the director.
Yeah, it's. I mean, I feel like it's 100% Western in my book, like just from setting and things of that nature. But I agree with you. For me, it's the best Inarritu film I've ever seen. I haven't been a big fan of most of his other stuff, obviously. If we were doing a top 10 Western film list, strictly Westerns, then this would have made my list. But including some of the war films, it just got bumped out a little bit. But it was definitely in contention. Because I think it's worthy of being in the discussion. I guess one thing that I have that went against it a little bit is I haven't rewatched it since 2015. So I was trying to go back on memory. I knew I enjoyed it more than I thought I was going to, but then it wasn't super high ranked for me that year. So without having to give it a fair rewatch, I couldn't quite get it onto this list. DJ, any thoughts on Revenant?
For some reason, I think that's the movie Tom Hardy should have won an Oscar for. I mean, other than the movies that I don't think he was nominated for Bronson because he's amazing in that. Revenant's one of those movies where I watched and I was like, okay, this is good. The bear scene is amazing, but I never want to watch this movie again. Not because I don't like it. It's just it's one of those movies.
Yeah,
it's just like I got it. It's so visceral. I don't think I need to see it again because it's going to be in that noggin of mine forever. Especially the bear attack. And I've seen a lot of messed up movies in my lifetime where the horror of it and the stuff like that kind of leaned more toward where I was going, not the war element of it. So that's the only reason it didn't really make my list. Not because it's not good, because the direction's amazing. Inarritu is one of the greatest living directors we got right now. The performances are great. I love a revenge film, but to me, it's almost a Western more than it's a war film. It was hard for me not to put it on my list, but I understand it being on anybody else's.
All right, and what was your number 9, DJ?
My number 9 is Overlord. This is the one that I had to rewatch with another film that might be on somebody else's list to see if it made the cut, and it won. So I like it because of the Wolfenstein crazy nature of it. It kind of reminds me of this video game called Wolfenstein. I think even with that stuff aside, it's a solid war film. The airdrop scene in the beginning is one of the just alone is a fantastic sequence. And it's about these soldiers that their job is to knock out a satellite array so the operation on D-Day can happen. And it's the first time I ever seen Kurt Russell's son, or Wyatt Russell, who's playing U.S. agent in the Falcon and Winter Soldier TV show. But it's the first time I ever seen him in anything. And he has his father. Like there's scenes in there. I'm like, hey, that's Mick. What's his name from The Thing? That's Kurt Russell's character. He's very good in it, and he plays this kind of ambiguous leader of this little platoon trying to survive to get the mission completed. It's a really good movie, and it's fun. And I'm glad they were potentially going to make it a Cloverfield attachment, and they decided not to. Thank God, because when it's by itself in a bubble, it's a really good movie. And the lead of the movie, I think that's the kid from Snowfall. I think that's him. I'm not 100% sure. I got to look it up. But the other lead, if that's the kid, I think his last name is Idris. I believe that's him. I could be wrong. But he's very good. He's very good, and you get a lot of good performances. The guy from Game of Thrones is in there. The pirate guy from that everybody hated at the end of the movie show. But yeah, it's really fun war film where you enjoy it, and it has a little horror elements to this. So it's kind of a genre bending type of movie.
I saw this come up on a couple of the lists that I was looking at. Screen Rant had this at like their number 7 war film of the last decade. Next Best Picture had it at number 10 overall. It's a blind spot for me though. I have not seen this.
You would like. I think you dig it. I think because it's got these horror elements, but it's not like it's a scary way. It's in a gruesome way. But it's just a fun movie.
Amanda, so my wife will be more prone to watch it then, so that's good. There's going to be a couple that I know. There's a couple blind spots I have on the Western list for sure that I saw come up on a lot of lists. So I'll have a little homework after this is done. Dan, have you seen Overlord?
I have. It's been forever though. Like I do remember getting that from the library.
Okay.
It like DJ mentioned, it is weird. It's weird and fun, which is a weird thing to say about a war film. The special effects are really impressive. Like you don't necessarily think of like CGI that much when you think of a war movie, but I know there's like the one word I think about when I think about that movie is intense, and I think it's pretty much intense from the beginning. The title is very ultimately.
Gotcha. And I forgot to mention, you had mentioned The Revenant. Out of the 7 lists that I looked on online, 5 of them had Revenant in the top 10. So a lot of agreement there with that one being in the conversation. For my number 9, I'm going to go to the world of the Westerns for the first time here. This film was actually left off of most of the list I looked at, although it did land number 1 for a site called Cultured Vultures. And for my number 9, I'm going to go with the Michael Fassbender film, Slow West. The Slow West was a slow build for me because I wasn't huge on it at first when I first watched it, but then the more that time passed and the more I thought about it and kind of rewatched a little bit, it definitely built up for me. This is a 2015 listed as a British New Zealand action Western. It's weird that this one's listed. I wouldn't think action with this one because it does fit its title. It's a slow build the whole time, but watching Michael Fassbender and Cody Smith-McPhee was very entertaining, and then the kind of the interactions with each other. It's rare for me to kind of like the film that kind of backs away a little bit from both a pacing standpoint and a storytelling standpoint and kind of has a little bit more of the slow, quiet moments and things like that. I'm not against it, but a lot of times I feel like directors just do it for style points, and there's not as much substance there. Whereas I feel like it's done for a purpose in this one. And I just think this one's, the more you think about it, the more you discuss it with somebody else, the more you let it kind of more dissecting that you do of it. It's just got a lot of cool elements to it that you can kind of find. So I'll watch anything with Michael Fassbender. So, that works. It's got Ben Mendelsohn in here as well. And I just feel like they're made for this type of film and this genre. I'd like to see Fassbender in more Westerns, actually. I do have to apologize if you are all hearing crying babies in the background, but I live in a house with an 8-month-old, so just hear it and then be thankful that you don't have to hear it in your house, or be jealous that you don't have babies in your house anymore. I don't know, whichever way you're going to react to that. But my number 9 is Slow West. Dan or DJ, any thoughts on that one, or we can go to Dan's number 9?
No, I'm saying that's the second Western Michael Fassbender's in. Do you guys know what the first one is?
Whew. You got me.
300? No, that's not right.
Here's a hint. It's not a good movie.
Oh, I was like, which movie are we gonna call a Western that I don't believe is a Western?
Was it one of the remakes of the Magnificent Seven?
No, it's a comic book movie actually called Jonah Hex.
Jonah Hex.
Oh,
yeah.
There we go.
I forgot about that.
Dan, you said you had this on your list as well.
Hold on, I forgot Jonah Hex came out. Let me rework my top 10 real quick.
Oh my god!
Put that on there. Slide that in there. Get that Megan Fox action in there. Come on.
That's awesome.
So regarding Slow West, it's actually my number 3. So I guess I'll talk about it now. I think a reason maybe why a lot of people don't regard it as well, because before we're doing this list, I'm like, let me go back and check out the trailer. The trailer makes it out to be a completely different movie. It makes it seem like it's just fast paced, action packed from start to end. And it's like the exact opposite of that. I wouldn't say it's like ultra slow. Like it's not, Once Upon a Time in the West or something like that, where you have that opening of like 15 minutes or so where it's just people just hanging out ultimately. But it is also in a beautifully shot movie. The action that does come at the end, like that shootout with the tall grass, it's fantastic. And there's also a really good sense of humor in it as well. So it's great, and it's just like great actors, like you mentioned, Fassbender, Ben Mendelsohn, who I think is like, I don't know, one of the best actors of last decade. Like anything he was just amazing in, and it was the case here. So the thing I think about the most is just how beautiful it looked, and considering it did seem like a movie that was obviously in a smaller budget compared to something like The Revenant, but it was able to me have a much bigger emotional impact, and I was just more visually impressed by what they were able to do. You know, they weren't necessarily doing these long takes or anything like that, but just the design, the cinematography, what they got out of that to me was why I loved it so much. I haven't rewatched it in a while. I do want to go back and see it again. But it was like you with some of your top 10s. It was like number 2 or number 3 the year it came out in 2015, and it's only like grown stronger in my head since then.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's one that's worth a revisit for a lot of people, because I feel like, you know, people talked about it the year it came out, and then it's kind of like faded away, and I feel like it's worth staying in the discussion. DJ, what's your number 8?
My number 8 is another genre-bending Western, this time instead of a genre-bending war film, starring a Russell that's not Wyatt. I'm going with Kurt Russell's film Bone Tomahawk. Craig Zahler makes a Western I hadn't ever, and I'm a big Western guy. I had never seen a Western like this because of not just the brutal, violent nature of it, like, 'cause I've seen, you know, Wild Bunch and stuff, but the horror elements of it, I just, it caught me off guard. And it has, on top of that, there's this dread that's of the people that they're trying to get to, that are in the way he just handles the violence. It's not scared me, but I was like, oh man, it makes you feel uneasy the whole time. And on top of that, you have really good performance. I mean, Kurt Russell can play this character in his sleep, but I didn't think Matthew Fox could be good at anything, and he's really good in this. And Richard Jenkins' oldie prospector character, I thought should have got nominated, because he is almost unrecognizable as his role. But yeah, again, it is not for the faint of heart. It is very violent, very, very violent. But there, in terms of if you watch a bunch of Westerns, you want to see one that it's literally one of those things that you just gotta see, just because you're not going to see something like it before. I'm going to put Bone Tomahawk right there.
Yeah, when you were talking about the other film, I believe it was Overlord, when you made the comment that you said it's or maybe you had made a comment about one of them that it was not a film that you're going to necessarily want to watch again. That wasn't Overlord, it was the other one, but like it's same with Bone Tomahawk. Like, it's something that you watch. I don't know how many times you rewatch it. It just really sticks with you, though.
Right.
And this would have been my number 7 Western of the last decade. It doesn't make my combined list, but it would have been number 7 for Western. And DJ, a lot of people are agreeing with you on all the lists I looked at. It was on every one of them but one. Screen Rant had it as the number 2 Western of the last decade. Taste of Cinema had it as the number 1. So obviously some agreement out there that Bone Tomahawk, and it came out of nowhere too. I like Matthew Fox just because I used to be a big Party of Five fan, and I like Lost. But I was surprised. It was like the first time I've seen him in like a bona fide like movie role, and that wasn't just cheesy or something like that. So I think this one definitely made an imprint on a lot of people, and a lot of people were talking about it back in 2015, that's for sure. Dan, thoughts on Bone Tomahawk? Or otherwise I will move on to my number 8.
Yeah, like it's not my top 10, but again, it is certainly deserving. It's a movie you're never going to forget. It's, you know, one you experience more than watch, for sure. And I think that's something that we're seeing as a kind of the common with as Craig Zahler's movies. Yeah. It's just brutality is something he is very keen on. And I don't know if it all started with Bone Tomahawk, even with some of the other films, I still think is near the top. It makes you realize how bad the West was. It's like, this was not a nice place.
No, not at all. Not at all. It's not like the Wild West from Back to the Future. But for my number 8, this is interesting because I was going through all these lists and stuff like that, because as we do with all the genres, it's like what movies fit in that genre, what movies don't fit in that genre. What genre do you think of when you hear a movie's title? Do you think of it as this? And I wouldn't necessarily have thought about a couple movies that would fit into this group, because I just feel like the genre is the director. And I never think of any of his films as being in any specific genre, because they're just Tarantino films. So the more I looked at all these lists, though, like they all are listing a couple of different Tarantino films, and I was like, I guess that's true. They would qualify for this genre, and because of that, I can't ignore them. So it's number 8, and it's Hateful Eight. I didn't do that on purpose. But it was my number 6 film of 2015. And I know a lot of people have been a little bit more down on like his last few films, but I am not in that group. I think every Tarantino film has basically been wonderful. And you just talked about Kurt Russell. So, put Kurt Russell, Samuel L. Jackson, Jennifer Jason Leigh, Walter Goggins, Tim Roth, Michael Madsen, Bruce Dern. I mean, Channing Tatum finds a way in there, I guess, but it's just such a ridiculously talented cast, and even for the carriage ride and everything else like that, like the whole movie's worth it just for that sequence. And I don't know, there's just a lot of things to appreciate and enjoy that are very Tarantino-ish in this film. I'm not going to put it at the top of his filmography, but I think if we're looking at Westerns and war films that came out, over the last decade, I would put this one in with the Westerns. And it would probably be, my number, probably around 5 best Western of the last decade, if we're qualifying it as a Western. So I'm going to give Tarantino some love here and put Hateful Eight at 8. Dan?
I do like Hateful Eight. It wasn't strong enough to make my top 10, but I'm going to go back to. So I pretty much just had one Western, and I'm going to continue that with my next film for my number 9, with another Western that's very different than that of Revenant, which is very brutal in your face. It's like it doesn't stop. We talked about Slow West earlier, which is my number 3. I guess slow Westerns or something maybe that just strike my fancy. And that's with my number 9 is Meek's Cutoff by Kelly Reichardt, which is a movie that I think is probably not for a lot of people, because it is very, where Revenant is brutal and in your face, Meek's Cutoff is realistic in a very different sense, and how just mundane it maintains. It's because there's literally these people traveling, or if you're a big fan of the Oregon Trail, like I played many a game back in my day in the 90s, this is basically Oregon Trail, the movie, but they just couldn't get the rights. Maybe, I'm not sure. But it's just this group of settlers going through that journey, and it seems like it does do its best to stay very true to life. But similar with Slow West, it is a gorgeous looking movie. And one of the scenes I think about the most is just where you see these people traversing the land, traveling, and it just the way it transitions within the landscape, and like it's just like it's like doing a trick with your eyes, how like you won't go from one scene to the next, just all these little clever tricks. It does end pretty abruptly, which I think could strike some people, and like I said, just the general pacing may not be for everyone, but I just felt it felt like you were there. It felt more like a documentary that was able to exist in 1845. So that's why it was my number 9.
Excellent. That was when I mentioned when DJ was talking about Overlord that I knew I had a couple blind spots. This was the other one that was big time on my mind because I saw it on so many different lists and I haven't seen it yet. Screen Rant did 2 lists of the top Westerns of last decade, and Meek's Cutoff was number 5 on one of them and number 1 on the other one. So made a lot of appearances, and I knew I had a blind spot. Just didn't have a chance to rectify that before we got to our list. DJ, any thoughts on Meek's Cutoff?
This is my blind spot. I have not seen this movie, and I'm angry because I got to look it up now. I have not seen it, but you just you sold. All you had to do is have Dan in the room and say, "Look, Oregon Trail, the movie," and I'm in. You just got my money. So I played Oregon Trail like a fiend as a kid. So I want to see Oregon Trail, the movie. That's all that the posters are saying. Oregon Trail, the movie. It's not Oregon Trail, the movie because they don't got the rights. But trust me, it's Oregon Trail, the movie.
I love it. Yeah. All right. All right, DJ, what is your number 7 then?
My number 7 has been mentioned already, but I'll just say it's Dunkirk. The only thing I really say about it, Nolan does one thing he does well in every one of his movies, love him or hate him, is scale. His manipulation of time in all his films I can take or leave, but the way he makes everything feel so big just works for a war film, especially a war film like Dunkirk, that the real story in how it happened is almost as good as the circumstances itself. And I know Dan said he didn't want to put documentaries on there. We're not going to put them on the list, but do yourself a favor. If you really want to see what led to Dunkirk, it's a movie itself. That's how Germany broke the lines and got the British in that situation. It's amazing. And it's been a constantly year-long gripe anytime somebody brings up Dunkirk to me, is the last shot of the movie was almost perfect, and then they cut away from it, because Dunkirk on its thematically, it is a nitpick, but for me it's a victory through a retreat. It's a win through a loss. So when you see the shot of Tom Hardy, and maybe I'm biased because I love Tom Hardy, of looking at a burning plane, that on the surface is like, oh, he lost. No, that burning plane saved so many people and he gets captured. That's a win and a loss. But they cut away to some kid on a train. I'm like, no, go back to the shot of Tom Hardy with the burning plane. That is the perfect end shot of that movie. And every time I watch that movie, I'm like, don't cut to the kid. I just want them not to cut to the kid. It's such a perfect shot. It's one of the most beautiful shots Christopher Nolan has ever done, for me anyway, personally. I love that shot, and it always soils the movie that they cut away to the stupid kid that I don't even know his freaking name. I don't care. Yeah,
I love it. All right, obviously I'm in agreement, since I had that at my number 10. For my number 7, I'm going to go to the third straight Western film that I've had on my list. Might have been higher if I would have rewatched it again, but I haven't seen it in a long time. This was my number 10 best film of 2010. So I have not seen it since 2010. But man, you put let's have Roger Deakins be the cinematographer. Let's have Carter Burwell be the music guy.
Right.
Let's put the Coens in the director chairs.
I like it.
Then let's assemble a cast of Jeff Bridges, Josh Brolin,
right,
Matt Damon, a very young Haley Steinfeld.
Who's that?
And Barry Pepper. So it's True Grit. It's the remake of True Grit, because nobody expected this to be that good, right?
No.
But man, I mean, it's got a 96 on Rotten Tomatoes. It was, I said Meek's Cutoff was number 1 on one of the Screen Rant lists. True Grit was number 1 on the other one. I just need to rewatch it, because we're in the year 2021. This came out in 2010. It's been 11 years since I've seen it. So I just, on memories basis, couldn't rank it higher than I did, but I knew it deserved it, because if we're talking Westerns, what is more of a true Western than True Grit? I've pretty much got every Western element involved. There's no question whether that fits in this genre, so I have to put it on my list. I have a few Westerns higher than it, maybe a little recency bias from one or two of them, but I think True Grit absolutely 100% deserves to be discussed during this conversation. So True Grit is my number 7. Dan?
It's also my number 7, so there you go.
Oh, look at that.
I like it. That's not a Western, that movie. That's serendipity.
This is one of the few films that one of the few films I saw multiple times within the theater, because it was one I went to see, and also the time when I went to see all Best Pictures back when theaters were open, and this was my first experience with Haley Steinfeld. And right when she burst on the scene, I'm like, okay, she has a career ahead of her, because she had a presence to her. The way she's like, going toe to toe with Jeff Bridges and Josh Brolin. She's just going full board, and she can hit that Coen Brothers dialogue. It was smart. It was funny. It pretty much had everything you ultimately would want. And I think this is an example of when the remake is far superior to the original film. And I think, be sacrilegious, I know this was the movie that John Wayne won an Oscar for, but I think Jeff Bridges' performance is better. I find his role in this so much stronger. Although on the downside, I felt like he ended up playing this character a lot again, like in that awful. Yeah, like in that awful R.I.P.D. movie, like it's just like it
Oh,
just seemed like I like that character. I'm gonna
man,
bring
why
him
do you
back in,
remember that
but
movie? Why do you remember that movie?
I don't know. I don't know.
We
So
scrubbed that from our memories, and we Men in Black that movie out of out of existence.
we should. But yeah, but it's I do love so much about this, and it. I've never, like, I believe it's based on a book. I've never read the book, but like I said, I do think it is far superior to the original, and an example of like showing why just because something is a remake doesn't necessarily mean it won't
Right.
be good.
Absolutely. All right, DJ, what do you have at your number 6?
This is ironic or coincidental. I'm not sure what irony is. My number 6 is another of, and trust me, it's my last one. My last modern day Western, and this is also probably my last Taylor Sheridan film. I'm speaking of Hell or High Water. Taylor Sheridan. I know people who hate him. I don't know why. He speaks to my Western sensibilities for some reason. He knows the beats that to hit that transcend this film from just a simple heist flick to an almost Once Upon a Time in the West-esque, like people fighting back against the dying of the West film. I mean, Chris Pine, Jeff Bridges, that we're just speaking of, and again, Gil Birmingham, again, are all fantastic. But the person that's I don't know how this person didn't win for Ben Foster is so freaking good in this movie. Other than stealing every scene he's in with fun and badass stuff, he has moments of subtlety that are just equally great. Like there's a scene, and maybe people who've seen this movie forget. There's a scene it's right before the climax of the movie where he's sleeping on a couch, and Chris Pine goes to wake him up, and he like leaps at Chris Pine and like goes to like kill him, and he freezes. It just tells you because Ben Foster's a character that spent time in jail. They don't mention it. They don't talk. They just cut away from it. And that just one scene, you're like, you know exactly what his experience in prison was like. It's such good acting by that guy. I mean, and Ben Foster's pretty much good in everything, but this is the performance. Right? You want to see how good Ben Foster is? I'm gonna make you watch Hell or High Water. It's so good. And then the scene at the end, I think, makes it a true Western because of the showdown. And I debate this with my friends all the time when we talk about this movie because we ask, it's kind of a spoiler alert, is Chris Pine going to pull on Jeff Bridges? Is Jeff Bridges going to pull? What would have happened if Chris Pine's family never showed up? What would have happened there? And we debated all the time. The movie is so good in those little moments, little character moments, and that's kind of what Westerns, I mean, in a theoretical sense, is these little showdowns, these little confrontations, and that one at the very end of the movie is so good. The movie itself ends in a way where you can make another movie off the last scene alone. It's so good. So Hell or High Water. That's my number 6.
I like it so much that I'm not going to comment. For my number 6, man, I didn't expect to see this on many lists because I just feel like it didn't quite get the praise that a lot of other eligible films that we could discuss today would have. But I was actually pleasantly surprised. It was Cinema Spotlight had it around like the 7 mark. Next Best Picture had it as number 5. Cinemaholic had it at number 4 as far as war films go for the last decade. The reason this one's going to rank higher for me than Dunkirk is because for me, it had that emotional pull that I was talking about when I talked about I didn't quite connect as much with Dunkirk. I didn't quite get in the feels like I did with this film. And I'm talking about 2014's film starring Brad Pitt, and that would be Fury.
That's my number 5 as well.
Oh, excellent. So it was my number 5 film overall of 2014. It comes in for number 6 for me right here, just because, like I said, there was something about it. I don't know if it was the way that they were able to get into the character development of each person, if it was the way that they kind of played with like the quiet and then the sound and different things like that. I don't know what it was about how this movie was made, but it just had more of an emotional impact with me than Dunkirk did. They're both great movies. They're both very well done. I'm not trying to take away anything from either film, but just me on a personal level, I just had that slight bit more connection and the feels, I guess, for Fury. I just really enjoyed this. I thought I wasn't anticipating. I'm a Brad Pitt fan. I'm not trying to shy away from that. I've liked so much of his work, regardless of what other people may or may not say about him. As far as the star, a lot of people don't give him as much of acting credit and just think he's a pretty face. But I think he's a brilliant actor as well. But I wasn't expecting as much from some of the supporting cast, and I thought there were some great performances. Logan Lerman, Michael Pena, John Barenthal, Scott Eastwood, Shia LaBeouf. And I'm not saying that some of those people aren't great actors. So, I mean, I was anticipating some good performances. I just didn't know how that group as a cast together was going to gel. And I thought it worked very well. I thought I still remember the scenes where, they're going into these, houses, / whatever you want to call them, almost like an apartment more times, but, with the people that lived in the areas that they were at. Just very I don't know, very real, something very real and gritty about it. So Fury really worked for me, and I have it here at my number 6 film overall. It's no spoiler alert, I guess, but it was my number 3 war film of the last decade. So a lot of love for Fury. DJ, you said you have this coming up next at your number 5.
Yeah, this is easily in Love Him or Hate Him. This is David Ayer's masterpiece. So a lot of these directors, every director has a film where you can just watch and go, this is the best thing this guy's done. And I hope he does something better. But when you watch this movie and you watch the rest of David Ayer's movies, you're like, what happened? This is so good. It shows the good and bad about the camaraderie soldiers have in war. This film showed me that Shia LaBeouf was really talented, because he's coming off of Transformers, right, I think at the time. Though recent personal events have truly let me down with him, but he is fantastic in this film. And I already talked about how Barenthal can be in every movie, and I will be happy. Mm-hmm. It was primarily why I had faith in Suicide Squad. God help me. But this is his good Suicide Squad movie. This is literally when I watched this movie and I heard he's doing Suicide Squad, I was over the moon, because I was like, if you just do that with the Suicide Squad, we have a good movie. But he didn't. He didn't do that. I don't know why.
Sure didn't. Dan, I'm going to give you the stage for a little while here, because I think at some point along the line you were bouncing off of one of our other picks, and I treated it like it was one of your picks. So anything that you've missed so far that you didn't get to talk about in your 10 through 6, and then you can piggyback off that, with anything left on this half of the countdown.
Yeah, the one I skipped over, and it's actually my number 8, but the things kind of got messed up. So I had Revenant at 10, Mixed Cutoff at 9, True Grit at 7, but at 8 I had I mentioned with war movies, I was picking things that are focusing more on the military, and that also included children military with Jojo Rabbit was my number 8. And to me, I knew this movie was working for me when like a pair of shoes had a massive emotional reaction to me. And I feel like a lot of times people dismiss humor as a way of not taking things seriously, or removing stakes from a situation, which I don't necessarily think that's the case. I think the way Taika Waititi approached this movie was something to be admired. And, it was funny and hilarious at times, but also deeply disturbing. And I thought the humor was clearly there to kind of heighten what was going on. And I don't think it was trying to make light or make fun or downplay. Obviously, it was just a different tactic, especially because you're seeing things through a child's perspective. And once you see that veneer kind of removed, it becomes something completely different. And then the ending of this, I think, is again something really phenomenal. I don't want to waste it, but it ruined it for people who haven't seen it. But surprisingly, a movie about Nazis can kind of have a feel-good moment here and there as well. So that's why it's so high for me. I guess it's not technically a military film, but definitely, dealing with Nazis and dealing with like the Hitler Youth that's why I included it.
And war is the whole setting, basically,
Right.
for all intents and purposes.
I barely cut it off my list because of the ambiguity of it. Because if it was on my list, it would be my number one. Because I can count on one hand I watch a lot of movies. I usually internalize the feelings I'm having, and I can count on one hand all the movies that make me openly cry. In Jojo Rabbit, by one scene, one little thing, and I'm not going to spoil it, but there's a look Sam Rockwell gives near the end of the movie to Jojo. It gets me every freaking time. I don't know what, because probably Sam Rockwell's a badass and he's awesome, but just this look he gives him, Jojo doesn't even see. It's so good. Other than the movie's hilarious and it's risky and it's dangerous and the message is amazing. It will tug at your heartstrings in a way where it catches you off guard. Like, what? Wait, am I openly weeping in front of people? And Jojo, what's going on here? But yeah, Jojo Rabbit's amazing.
I wasn't sure what to. I've loved all of Taika Waititi's stuff, whether from almost his entire career so far. And this was the one that I was like, I don't know what this is about to be. Like when we were talking about like most anticipated films probably that year, or when I was just going through what was coming out that year, and I was like, okay, the title of this film is Jojo Rabbit, and then I'm reading the description, and I'm like, where is he going with this? Like, what? How is what? I don't know. And I was so pleasantly surprised. I mean, it was thoroughly entertaining. I don't understand the critique or the criticism, I guess, that people have. There's no rule that, like, if you're making a movie about World War II or some other historical event, that you can't insert humor or insert some of the stuff that Waititi's known for and not still make it a serious movie that deals with serious events. Like, I just don't get why some people think those things can't mix. I've heard that argument with a couple different movies that have come out over the years that are like, oh, this is about the Holocaust, or this is about this, and they have a joke in there. How dare them? Like, I just don't get that. And I think Waititi is it's just like a mastercraft here of how he like blends the different things and like has you in stitches laughing 1 minute and then tearing up in the next minute, and after all is said and done, you're just thinking back to how impactful the film was that you watched that's called Jojo Rabbit, and it's like he took me for a ride, and I don't know what the ride was, but I enjoyed it type thing. So
if you approach it smart, like I grew up on Monty Python. Mm-hmm. If you use your brains and you approach difficult subject matter like the Spanish Inquisition or Jesus or the Holy Grail or the Crusades, and you do it with brains like Taika Waititi has done in literally every movie, if it's crass, like fart jokes on that, I understand that. But he's not coming at it at a place of that. He's actually, if you watch that movie, you come out going, oh, I see the message here. You can't give the point of this message without pointing at the absurdity of World War II and Hitler Youth and all that stuff.
Right. Like I've heard the same type of arguments, even though it's not anywhere near the same type of movie, but like Life is Beautiful, I've heard people like trash on that because it has moments that aren't necessarily what they expect from people that are in a concentration camp or something like that. It's just like, I look at it in the wider lens. But yeah, Jojo Rabbit was real close to making my list. I just wasn't sure how
the Ringer movie.
And then so you should have one left then at number 6, Dan.
Yeah, so my number 6 is one that's unquestionably a war movie. It's one really giant battle, and it's the last movie I saw in theaters before everything went crazy. And it's 1917, and I know that like talking about criticism of this, people kind of the obvious comparison and saying it's like a video game, and it's certainly I see that because it does feel like one huge cutscene where you're just going from moment to moment following this character, but seeing this in the theater, like I dialed right in, and it technically I think it is like one of the best achievements of the last decade, what it was able to do, and I know it was up for best special effects, and people are like, well, what special effects were there? But then you go and see like what they were like, a lot of the CGI and things that were used in ways that you wouldn't even imagine, and it's also one where the making of it is almost as interesting as the movie itself. So I get that narratively there's maybe not much here. It's literally just one mission, one man going through stop something, but I felt I was invested from beginning. Seeing the difficulty, like the challenges that were there, and just the intensity of it, I dialed right into it. So that's why it was my number 6.
All right, I'm going to save my thoughts on that one for a minute, but
Me too.
those are our 10 through 6 picks of both Western and war films. We're going to take a quick break, let you guys hear how you can listen to more of DJ's stuff, and we will come back with our 5 through 1 picks. So stick with us.
After these messages, we'll be right back.
On the Simplistic Reviews podcast, we talk movies. We talk TV. We talk.
Hello, Julie, what the heck are you doing?
Trying to make our spots sound more exciting by adding explosions.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure you could have got the point across with sound effects, not the real thing. Car.
Download the show on iTunes or at simplisticreviews.blogspot.com.
I'm sure your insurance company will cover that.
No, they won't.
No, they probably won't.
Now back to the show. Do you see how your patience paid off?
All right, thanks for sticking with us. We are back to give you our 5 through 1 picks for the best war and Western films of the last decade. DJ, you already gave away your number 5 for this part here with joining me with our Fury discussion right before the break. So I will pick up here with just a real quick mention of my number 5 because it has also been discussed already. And that was, I believe, your number 10, DJ. I'm going with Wind River as my number 5. It was actually my number 2 film of the 2017 when it came out. I liked it that much. I just thought performance-wise, it was great. From a visual standpoint, it was intriguing, and I like the kind of crime mystery elements of it, kind of mixed in with that westernish feel. So DJ already said much better than I can say why it deserves to be discussed on this list. So I will just say that it is my number 5, and let Dan take over with his number 5.
My number 5 has also been talked about before, so I won't go in great detail. Again, by David Mackenzie with Hell or High Water. I was really looking forward to this movie because I was a huge fan of Startup. That was my favorite film of the year it came out, and if you enjoy True Grit, I would highly advise checking that out. It's nothing like Hell or High Water taking place in a jail, but it's fantastic. Again, it has it's much more kind of a bare bones film, but very intense. Hell High Water, I was amazed by how much he upped his game in one movie, like the direction and it, like where Startup felt a little bit rough around the edges. Like Hell High Water felt like a movie that was like, a Hollywood movie through and through, and like a dated Western, taking the tropes of robbing banks and putting it in a new setting, especially one that was very apparently against the banks. Maybe the social commentary was a bit on the nose, but it was a bit warranted as well. And ultimately, it was a smart movie that was fun. And sometimes, like, smart movies can be boring, but they don't have to be, which I thought was a good way of approaching this. It's a lot more intelligent than you may seem because you're just focusing on all the antics. But I did love Jeff Bridges, especially his back and forth with his partner. They were good comic relief, but then when things got serious, and ultimately, like TJ mentioned with that showdown at the end, a lot was left unsaid, but in a smart way. So
I'll go ahead and jump in here as well. It's my number 3 overall, so not too far away from where we're at right now. I just remembered seeing this when it was coming out again, when we look at our most anticipated and stuff like that. The combination of David Mackenzie and Taylor Sheridan had me very intrigued about this one. This was one of my most anticipated films that year, and it definitely lived up to the hype. It ended up being my number 8 film of 2016, but here it ends up being my top Western of the last decade is how high I have it. So I think it's great. I think the performances, like you guys said, with Jeff Bridges, Chris Pine, Ben Foster, we get Gil Birmingham in there again. It's just a very, very entertaining film, and it's a very sophisticated way of putting it all together, directing it, and the whole kit and caboodle. So I think it's a total package film, and I know it might not have some of the Western aspects like you would see with like a True Grit or a even Slow West or Bone Tomahawk or some of those types of films. But for me, it's the top of the genre for last year, and it just shows all the different styles or types of westerns we got over the last decade. So definitely in agreement with you guys. So let's swing it back to DJ for your number 4.
My number 4 has been talked about it already, which is True Grit, and you guys know I suckle at the teat. I bow to the altar that whatever disgusting metaphorical statement you can for Roger Deakins, I do it. And this movie is like Roger Deakins. I don't even want to say phoning it in. He's so good. His phone-ins are works of art. It's so good. Because I think the best thing he's ever done, he got the Oscar for, which is Blade Runner 2049, the Blade Runner movie. But this, one of those futuristic Blade Runner sequels. But no, this it's such a beautiful. Every frame is a screensaver, and on top of that, the Coens, I think they've been making westerns their whole life. You can put Raising Arizona up there, certainly No Country. So True Grit's kind of like, yeah, this is where I'm going. We're gonna make a western. And I was joking earlier when I say who's Haley Steinfeld. I'm a huge Haley Steinfeld fan from this movie on. She is the living embodiment of Kate Bishop. I cannot wait for Hawkeye. Speaking of Jeremy Renner earlier, but she's fantastic in this movie. You got Thanos, Obadiah Stane, and Kate Bishop in the same movie. But no, the True Grit is one of those. We were talking about, Dan was talking about taking a sequel or a remake that supersedes the original. To Coenize anything is like a great. I like to see the Coens Coenize a lot of stuff. And I remember watching True Grit when I was a little kid, and I was like, "Oh, this is one of those." And then I watch it here, and like, the Coens just add things that the original didn't have: menace, fear, the danger. The original one, this felt like a great, action romp with John Wayne. And this one, I'm like, oh shit, Jeff Bridges is in trouble. Yeah, I don't know if he's gonna make it out of this situation. So yes, True Grit is a great film. That's why it's my number 4.
All right. Obviously, we are both in agreement. So for my number 4, I guess I'm just going to let this flag fly proudly because I've already mentioned this director once today. I almost feel cheap like putting him in here twice on this Western and war film because I feel like there could be other spots that I could have talked about. But luckily, you guys have brought most of those films out. But the internet's in agreement. I mean, Cinemaholic has this as their number 3 Western of the last decade. Charge has it as their number 3. Stacker has it as their number 7. Cultured Vultures has it as their number 4. Taste of Cinema has it as their number 4. Screen Rant didn't. Screen Rant also has it as his number 4. So I guess everybody agrees with me. So I'll put it at my number 4 too. It's Django Unchained. I mean, what else does need to be said about Tarantino films at this point? I mean, you got Jamie Foxx, you got Christoph Waltz, Leonardo DiCaprio, Samuel L. Jackson, Walter Goggins, Kerry Washington, et cetera, et cetera. You got Tarantino directing. It is 100% set in a Western setting, et cetera. And like all Tarantino movies, it just has those moments. It has those iconic lines of dialogue or sequences. And I just think of the violence and the just letting out of rage at different points that we see in this. And it's just classic Tarantino. I've listed The Hateful Eight and Django Unchained on here. They're not necessarily the best 2 Tarantino films out there, but if we're talking about films that would be considered Westerns in the last decade, I think you have to talk about both of them at least somewhere in the discussion. So it was my number 4 film of 2012, and it's my number 4 war/Western film of the last decade. So I'm not ashamed. Django Unchained.
Well, I'll join you because is also my number 4. So there you go.
Yes, everybody has it at number 4. I like it.
Yeah, I had no idea, but I do really love this movie. It is a whole lot of fun. I know it does get crazy near the end, and it's also been, I feel like, one of those films that is just memed to death now because of obviously some of the lines that have been utilized on the internet. But one of the things I love most about this too is this use of soundtrack, like especially when you have like Django going on his like final ride for revenge. Right. And I guess technically you could say this is Southern, but I don't know. Because he's the fastest gun in the South. But I just like the juxtaposition of taking this and working against the tropes of that time. And there are like moments of brutality of like that. It doesn't hide that, you know, how horrible it was for slaves and things like that. Like the sequences of them like walking when you have that overhead shot and they're like in chains. It brings a reality to it, even though things get kind of intense and crazy near the end. It clearly it's saying something with its violence. I don't think it's just being violent for violence sake. And performances, you know, are fantastic. I love Christoph Waltz in this, from the moment he shows up on screen to like just the sequences in the town. Yes, like he makes things far more elaborate than they need to be. Like that's his go-to, like for everything really. Like even his plan to, you know, for candy is much more elaborate than maybe it needs. But it's just this is a movie I've seen plenty of times. Like I saw it again. I saw this a couple of times in theaters, and since then. And I don't know where it would rank in my Tarantino list right now, but it's near the top for me. I just find it very watchable and just a lot of fun. But also, like I said, clearly saying something, even if it's not, you know, the most nuanced movie in the world.
Right. DJ, your thoughts on Django or your number 3 pick?
I'm gonna save my thoughts for Django till later. My number 3 pick is you guys know me better than most that Mad Max Fury Road is my favorite film of 2015. I've mentioned it a couple times.
Right.
So I've been on this show, maybe once or twice. But I think what gets lost is my second favorite film of that year was Beasts of No Nation, which is number 3. And I talked about earlier movies that I rarely cry in a movie. And this was a movie that's on that list and it wasn't like a cry because I was sad. There's a scene in this movie, and this is a movie about children from a fictional African nation that are indoctrinated into this army by Idris Elba. And there's a scene where he is amping up the children to get ready to murder or go to war. And it's so intense. I just got emotional. The way the music swells, and this is directed by Cary Fukunaga, who's directing the new James Bond movie. He did Maniac on Netflix, which, I mean, he is also a brilliant filmmaker in terms of visuals. But the acting in this movie, in the little boy who I think is in Spider-Man Homecoming for like 5 minutes, is so amazing. Where you see him in the beginning as this young innocent boy, and at the end of the movie, spoiler alert, kind of, he is a completely different person through the experiences he has. And Idris Elba's character, you kind of see, as a viewer, you kind of get indoctrinated, where you're like, yeah, maybe, yeah. It's so, I don't want to, good is not the word. It is an experience, that movie. And it came out of nowhere. I just watched it. I was like, yeah, whatever. I'll watch this piece of no name. And at the end of it, I was changed. It's one of the maybe the greatest war films I think I've ever seen. One of the best films. I would probably put in my top 20 films, because it takes a lot for me to have a visceral response in that way to a movie. And it might be blind spots for people. It is not for the faint of heart. In terms of cinematography and directing, I mean, Cary Fukunaga, it does long takes and beautiful visuals and stuff like that. But in terms of a movie, I think it's a movie that I think everybody should at least see once. So yeah, Beast of No Nation is my number 3.
All right, Dan, your thoughts on that one or your number 3?
Yeah, it was really hard leaving off Beast of No Nations because, like DJ mentioned, it is a powerful force. And again, that movie is directed like nothing else. I think it was one of the big first movies, and I think it was before it was nearly as accepted as it is now. And I think there was a lot of negative like reaction to this idea that Netflix doing a movie like this, and I think that's why it maybe didn't get like the award recognition it should have, because I do think that like that was deserving of so many like higher awards and never received much of anything, unfortunately, especially Idris Elba, who, you know,
Amazing.
I think arguably his best performance. I mean, there's a lot of great performances, but it's certainly up there. His most twisted performance for sure.
Yeah.
And my number 3 was already talked about, Slow West, so we can move on to the next on the list.
All right, we're going on. My number 3 was Hell or High Water. We already talked about that. So DJ, we're right back at you. You were number 2.
I'm back. My number 2 was just talked about a couple spots ago, which was Django Unchained. Now we've been kicking around what westerns are, and I see westerns that essentially are at their core tension through confrontation, the anticipation of violence that builds up like a pot that's boiling over on the stove. And it can be argued that Tarantino is one of the best filmmakers when it comes through tension, through confrontation. Just watch any movie he's ever done, ever. So this first real foray into a Western really won me over. He, like you guys were saying, they call it a Southern, but it has every element of a Western. Wrong man seeks justice and tries to save the woman he loves. That's a Western to its core, with amazing performances by, like you guys said, damn near every cast member in this. Jonah Hill's amazing in this movie. Don Johnson's amazing in this movie. Bruce Dern's amazing in this movie. The original Django Unchained, the original Django, who's in this movie for 5 minutes, he's amazing in this movie. And it makes me laugh because this was supposed to be a Will Smith vehicle, and Will Smith got angry because, he didn't want to get angry. He wanted to kill the villain, and I think he missed the point because the real villain is not Calvin Candy, it's Steven. That is the villain of the movie, and if he would realize that, spoiler alert, he would get to kill the villain of the movie. So yes, I mean, Christoph Waltz, who I had seen in some stuff. This is where I was like, this guy's amazing. This guy's amazing. And I mean, my screensaver on the stream, I do Miscast Entertainment sometimes, is Laughing Leo from Calvin Candy. So I love this movie so much. The scene itself with him ripping open his hand and continuing the scene should have got Leo the Oscar. I mean, the scene where he busts his hand open, he's bleeding all over Kerry Washington. That's not special effects. That really happened, and he finished the scene, and they shot it. It's such a, I mean, the stories that go with this movie are great, and I think it's just, I mean, it's the Western. I remember watching Django, the original Django, when I was very, very young, and when I realized, oh, he's race bending it a little bit. Let me see what he does with it. It blew me away, and it's probably, of all the movies on this list that I watch, probably more often than any other. So yeah, Django Unchained, my number 2.
Obviously, we agree with you. For my number 2, it's been spoken of already once, I believe just once, and this was my number 6 film of 2019. Could be higher if I kind of re-go through that list, I think, but Dana, you talked about it, and I'm going with 1917. Man, I don't care if it's a gimmick, if it's not a gimmick. I don't care anything about any of those types of critiques. I care about what I felt and what I experienced while I watched the film. And that was, the whole film could have been a one take for me because I didn't take my eyes off of the screen. So, there was no takes for me. It was just a wonderful experience to watch. And like I said, I'm not taking anything away from Dunkirk. I think it's a great film, and it's probably on a lot of people's top lists and whatnot. It's just Fury and 1917 for me just were more emotional experiences on a personal level. So that's just on me. It's not anything to do with the movie necessarily, but I think it is crafted very well. I'm a huge Sam Mendes fan, and I think he was phenomenal. I didn't know anything about some of the cast here. I mean, obviously I know, Benedict Cumberbatch, Colin Firth, and, Mark Strong and some of those guys, but I don't know much about the rest of the cast. And I just think they were mesmerizing with their performances. I think too, it's similar to what I felt with Fury. I thought on a sound level, just the way that this film is done and edited and things like that, like the quiet moments are just that much more quiet, and the loud moments are just that much more jarring. Like, I think these Fury 1917 do a really interesting job of playing with those sound dynamics and really making it feel like you're immersed into that world. And it's another interesting thing to do because, you take war films and they all have to pick like what aspect of the war they're going to talk about or what events on the war they're going to talk about. And a lot of times it's hard because you're doing a war film and we all know the outcome. We know the outcome of the war, or we know the outcome of the battle that's being depicted, or things of that nature. And I didn't know a lot about what was actually being depicted in this one. So it wasn't like nothing was spoiled for me. I mean, I know, major beats to this war and stuff like that, but I didn't necessarily know exactly how this was going to take place when you kind of narrow it down into the actual story they're telling. And honestly, it's a hard war to depict, I believe, in my opinion. Like, when you think about the best war films throughout time, or things of that nature, it seems like you get a lot of World War II films, you know what I mean? You get a lot of Civil War films, things like that. World War I is a tough one. And I think it's never possibly been done better. I mean, I'd have to go through and see all the different World War I films, I guess, that have ever existed. I didn't have that prepared, but it's got to be up there, like one of the best depictions or movies that take place in World War I for me. So I can't give this film enough praise. I've only seen it once, so I mean, I know it just came out a little while back, years wise, but it could be even higher. But for me, this is easily one of the best war films of the last decade. So 1917 is my number 2. Dan, what is yours?
For my number 2, I'm going to go back to the genre of Westerns. And again, another more modern take on Westerns, but a very slower, more methodical, not necessarily Meek's Cutoff, but again, more of, maybe this is just saying something about me. This also feels very much like a documentary from 2017, and it's The Rider, directed by Chloe Zhao. I'm probably pronouncing that incorrectly, but who will be soon to directing. Well, she is directing, I guess, currently Eternals. So going from the Rider, which is this very extremely low budget movie about people who are on the rodeo circuit, and it's just so compelling and it's methodical in its pacing. What strikes me too is just there's a lot of use of like non-actors in this. In one sequence in particular, where there's an individual who had a past accident, being on a horse, and you see like the actor kind of just interacting with him, and you see just the facade of all of it kind of just fall down. He's kind of pretending being on a horse again. It's just a moving moment of just humanity in a way, and I think that's what this gets at, just the relationship between this individual who is clearly lost within life in a way, like he's not having a lot of options and trying to just find his way, and the rodeo is kind of one of those elements. And I think it's similar to like where the West has gone in a lot of ways, where the West is not what it once was, and it seems kind of adrift because it's not that wild land anymore, and it has to be tamed, but it necessarily maybe doesn't want to be. And I think that's kind of where this conflict comes from, and I think that's a big reason it appealed to me, just because of this realism to it, and seeing kind of a life, the ability to see a perspective that I've never really experienced, and just thought what Chloe, the director, did was got in there and kind of removed the camera. So you're just feeling like you're watching like a general life right on the screen. And like I said, even utilizing real actors in a case. One of my favorite documentaries from last decade was Buck, which follows a very similar story. It's the movie that the main character of the person that documentary focuses on is the guy that was based the Horse Whisperer on. And it's similar too. You just see this relationship with horses. I've rode a horse like a couple times in my life. I'm not like someone who would have any desire to go to a rodeo. But that didn't necessarily matter, because it's just the movie was that good. And it's a movie that just I've enjoyed more and more the more I think about it. It was like number 2 the year it came out. And I think more as I kind of reevaluate and seen it again, it might be my favorite film from that year. I know in the back me up, I know Barack Obama also really loved it too. It was in his movies to watch the year it came out. So some pretty high praise from a very powerful person. So but it's a very small film, and like I am curious to see how the director goes from this to like the Eternals, because I talked about like how with Mackenzie went from Startup to Hell and High Water. I think that's even a bigger jump, but maybe she can do it. I think she's really good at least capturing people, and so I don't know why they picked her, but she certainly has some perspective that they thought clearly saw something in the writer like I did, and that's why it's my number 2.
Yeah, Cinemaholics had this on their list, and actually Stacker had this as their number one Western of last decade as well. A lot of the other ones had it off, maybe didn't left it off their list, maybe because it was a little bit of a smaller film that people hadn't seen as much. I haven't seen it either, so it is another blind spot for me. So I'll add Meek's Cutoff and The Rider to my list of to-do list as far as film watching goes. DJ, have you seen The Rider?
I have not, but I know Dan is correct. In about a year's time, everybody's going to know who Chloe is, because I think she's going to probably win the Oscar or probably win multiple Oscars this year for Nomadland with Frances McDormand, a Coen brother wife.
Oh, yeah,
But yeah, I want to
as
see.
well.
Yeah, so yeah, she's going to be a household name, I think, in about a year's time. So her filmography's like you're saying, she's good with people. So I want to check this out, because I kind of want to get a taste of what I could be in store for that movie Eternals, because I have no idea what the heck it's going to be about.
All right, so it is time for the reveal of our number of films. I'm guessing they're all stuff that has already been talked about, but we will see. DJ, what is your number one war or Western film of the last decade?
If you have been paying attention to my weird machinations on my list, you've been noticing that I go Western war all the way up. My last movie was Django Unchained. If you know what's going on here, I haven't mentioned one war movie, but it has been mentioned before. It is 1917. It is a masterclass of filmmaking. Not since Saving Private Ryan have I seen a war movie that literally had me just breathing heavy, like oh my god. And yes, I've said multiple times, it's not a movie; it's a magic trick. This movie, it's like they're doing something, but the purpose of it is to make you feel what they are feeling in the movie. And the trench runs, the explosions. When I hear people like demean it, oh, it's a video game. It's like, man, this actually happened. this is. I mean, I know people think Call of Duty is the center of the universe, but guys, this is real. This actually happened, and the way Sam Mendes brings it to life is amazing. And I don't know how he did it. I mean, I've seen the behind the scenes movies, but there had to be a meeting before they started doing the movie. Like, okay, look, I want to make it look like all one shot. And then somebody looked at him, it's like, it's a war movie, bro. You can't, what are you talking about? He goes, no, I'm Sam Mendes, I'm going to do it. And they did it. And I remember, I work at a theater, and it's one of the few movies that when people are coming out, they're asking me, hey, how did they do that? And I had to literally explain, it's all one shot. They hide some of the cut, like different people, different walks of life, walking out of that movie, asking me questions about how that movie's made. That rarely happens, other than a comic book movie, because they don't know who the hell the characters are. But for a war movie, they're walking up to me saying, wait a minute, I just realized 40 minutes in that they haven't cut the camera. Like, yeah, they're doing a whole bunch of crazy secret. So I would say watch 1917, because it is a marvel in filmmaking, and that all these movies are marvels in filmmaking. But that, to me, the scale, not the scale, but just the Herculean effort it must have took to bring this movie to the screen, which you're supposed to watch it in. I cannot fathom it. It's amazing to me. So yeah, 1917.
Yeah, obviously I'm in agreement, since it was my number two. My list was interesting because I had more Westerns than 6 Westerns and only 4 war films. But war films made up my top 2. So might have more Westerns, but I have 2 war films sitting at the top of my list. My number 1 is also the only film that was also number 1 the year it came out. So if there's any loyal listeners out there, you might be able to predict this one. But DJ talked very eloquently about Beasts of No Nation, and that is my number 1 film of 2015 and my number 1 film of this list. This is number 1 on this list for the same reason Schindler's List makes a lot of number 1s, other types of movie lists I make. It's like, do a lot of people want to watch it? Maybe not. Do a lot of people want to watch it a second time or a third time? Probably not. But I agree with what DJ said. I feel like it's something that should be watched once at least. And that doesn't take away, just because it might not have that rewatchability or might not be the most feel-good movie, for me, almost gives it more credit, because it's like, something that can be that powerful, that can be that disturbing, that can be that impactful, and maybe hard to watch, but just that worth of a watch. Like, it's so important of a movie for people to see. It blew me away that year, hands down. Like, it was easily my number one film of that year, without question. A huge Idris Elba fan. I think he's amazing, even though I don't necessarily want to see him play a character like this, but it was just so powerful. And it's like, regardless of the fiction, nonfiction of it or whatever, like, this type of nonsense happens like
all the time.
This happens way more, and I feel like it's such a American thing to turn a blind eye to it. It's such a first world problem to act like this doesn't happen, or to be like, oh, this is too disturbing for me to acknowledge or digest. It's like, no, we need to acknowledge and digest more of the horrors that go on around the world, and tackle them, and address them, and things of that nature. And I feel bad, because I think Dan hit the nail on the head there, where he said, like, this was one of the very first big films that came out on Netflix, and I just wish it wasn't. I think we've turned a corner since then. I mean, I don't think it has that. I don't think the critics are as
strict.
Well, it's not even strictness, it's just an uppity, like, nonsenseness to it. But I feel like if this would have came out on the big screen and got like the normal cycle of how movies are treated, like, it would have gotten more attention and more people would have watched it. But like, I will never shy away from saying that Schindler's List is one of the best movies, or the most important movies that's ever been made. And I feel like this is in that same class. It's just like, it's something that deserves to be watched, deserves to be talked about, deserves to be, known. And it's easily my number one film on this genre list as well. Dan, what's your number one?
My number one's another movie that's been talked about a great deal. I believe it was your number 10, Kevin. I know it was on your list, DJ, someplace. It might be obvious, but I was very close to putting The Rider number one. But ultimately, when I thought the film that I don't know, blown away by is the right terminology, but I just engrossed with from beginning to end. Excuse me, it was Dunkirk. And the first time I watched it was as Christopher Nolan intended on my phone.
And he just spit on the ground when you said that.
But I was able to see it in theaters actually after that. And surprisingly, both experiences were enjoyable. But I know, like, the use of time can get somewhat kind of, I don't call it a gimmick, but it just sees something that he fixates on a lot. And I get that. And I understand, like, where the criticism of it's maybe not the most warming film emotionally. If I compare this to something like Band of Brothers, right, where, like, it really, the emotion is there from beginning to end. You get to know who these individuals are. You see them as people. Where this was more the movie about the effort, movie about the mission that they were going on. And although maybe I didn't have I wasn't engrossed emotionally, I was engrossed in the sense of just seeing something play out in such a remarkable scale, and an important scale, with this ever-present ticking time bomb occurring, where just this cavalcade of bad things happening from time and time again. And one of the most important achievements really in the war. And I think DJ made a great point regarding how this was a victory in defeat, being able to retreat in order to fight another day, and just seeing what it encountered, and how it took an entire army and it took an entire people to get this done. And it's surprised it took this long to get a movie like this, because honestly, I know a lot I've read a lot and watched a lot about World War II. Dunkirk, at least on the American side, we don't talk about it nearly as much as we do D-Day and other pieces of World War II history. But you realize, like, this was just as important. Maybe it is technically a retreat that we don't focus on it as much, and Americans weren't involved. But I just thought from the fantastic battles in the air, just how it would move from moment to moment. I thought it was just craftsmanship with a capital C. So again, it's probably a bit obvious, and But I would be lying if I didn't put it my number one. So that's why I put it my number one.
Absolutely. Screen Rant, Cinema Spotlight, and Cinemaholics all have this also as their number one film from the last decade. So a lot of agreement there. Real quick, guys, I'm going to have you guys go through your 10 through 1 just because I know there's a lot of jumping around. So we'll get the whole list in one chunk from each of us, and then we'll talk a little bit more about some honorable mentions and things like that. So DJ, what were your 10 through 1?
My number 10 was Wind River. My number 9 was Overlord. My number 8, Bone Tomahawk. My number 7 was Dunkirk. My number 6 was Hell or High Water. My number 5 was Fury. My number 4 was True Grit. My number 3 was Beast of No Nation. 2, Django. 1, 1917.
All right. For me, it was number 10, Dunkirk, followed by Slow West, then Hateful Eight, True Grit. 6 was Fury, Wind River. Number 4 was Django Unchained. 3 was Hell or High Water. 2 was 1917. And my number 1 was Beast of No Nation. Dan?
Number 10 was The Revenant. Number 9, Meek's Cutoff. Number 8, Jojo Rabbit. True Grit. 1917. Number 5 was Hell or High Water. Then Django Unchained. Slow West at number 3. Number 2, The Rider. And number 1, Dunkirk.
Interesting, too, when you look at some of the years and stuff like that, it seems like 2015 cross-genre because we had Beast of No Nation, Hateful Eight, Bone Tomahawk, Slow West, and Revenant, all 2015. I think that was the most
good year. Good year for movies.
This, at least for this genre. It seemed like the middle of the decade, we got a lot more of the war and the Western films on either end. It seemed like it kind of petered out at both times. But real quick, we're going to go around and just give any films that were close to making your list, might have made your list if it was strictly war or strictly Western, but didn't quite make the combined list. DJ, anything you'd like to mention?
Dan brought up Jojo Rabbit. We talked on and off air about how if it was on this list, it'd be my number 1. But I was trying to stay as close to the I guess the topic as I could. Not saying it's not. It's just I wanted to get as clear as I could. Right. And Jojo Rabbit was amazing. So being on any list, I'm happy. I really, really wanted to put Sicario on here, but again, it was kind of like the same thing where it's like, maybe it feels like a Western, but it's not really. But right. I mean, and it got Roger Deakins, and again, I told you, I bow to the man. And I almost put also Logan on here as a Western, but again, I
saw that listed by quite a few sites.
Right. Logan's amazing, and it is a Western. I think it's more of a comic book movie than a Western to me. So I again, if it was on a list, I don't mind it. If it isn't, it's fine.
The Westerns that I was considering, some of them already got talked. Bone Tomahawk would have been probably my next one, and that would have been my number 11 on this list. I like the remake of Magnificent Seven. I know a lot of people don't, but I just think it's a great cast and a great, just a fun romp. If you're watching it with a group of friends, you can have fun with it. I'm not saying you have to take it serious. Hostiles, I actually enjoyed Hostiles. The Kid with what's his name? Ethan Hawke. No. I have the right actor?
Yeah, it's Ethan Hawke.
Yeah, the Kid, I enjoyed a lot. That from just the last year there, 2019 of the decade. I thought that's a Vincent D'Onofrio film, and I thought that was really good. I considered The Revenant as well, that got mentioned. For war films, it was tricky for me because I feel like 1917, Fury, Dunkirk. And obviously, if I throw Beast of No Nation in there, even though it's a little bit different because of the perspective, I think those are just like heads and tails above everything, or head and shoulders. I guess that's the analogy. Above everything, heads and tails. But there was like a lot of modern war films that I just didn't quite throw in there that I know got a lot of buzz and a lot of talk that came out in the last decade. Stuff like Zero Dark 30, American Sniper, Lone Survivor, those types of things. I just didn't quite know where I landed on them. I actually really enjoyed Eye in the Sky, from kind of a little bit of a different perspective, maybe not as much as a war as it is more into the intelligence sector of how that plays into war. But I still think you could make an argument for that. The one I was probably considering most was Hacksaw Ridge. It was real close to making it. It was that and then Zero Dark 30 that I had just on the outside looking in. Dan, the other Western I forgot. Actually, 2 I'll throw out there. They didn't quite make my final, honorable mention cut, but A Woman Walks Ahead and Ballad of Buster Scruggs, I at least thought about. So, Dan, any other things that you want to mention?
I actually completely forgot about Zero Dark 30 because I was looking again. I used Letterboxd, and for some reason they don't count it as war film, so
Mm.
I'm not scared. But I love Zero Dark 30. It probably would have made my top 10. So ultimately, other films I did think about. I originally had Unsung D's in my top 10, but I took it off because although like it takes place in the backdrop of a war, ultimately the war element is not kind of the major focus of the film. It's one of Villeneuve's, say his name, director of movies like Prisoners and Blade Runner. I think it's still, I think his best movie, or at least my favorite movie he's done. But like I said, a lot of it takes place within a war going on, but the war isn't necessarily the major focus. Another movie I thought about was First They Killed My Father, which was directed by Angelina Jolie, which another movie I thought was so much better than I ever anticipated it being. That's dealing with the war in Cambodia, but it didn't quite make it. But that is, I was actually impressed because the other films that Angelina Jolie did, I think that she had Unbroken, which didn't quite work out. And that kind of got all the kind of buzz going into it, anticipation where the First They Killed My Father just kind of went under the radar, which was, I thought, a much better movie. I also thought about Rango, the animated movie.
A lot of people ranked that. I had that on quite a few that showed up. Yep.
And I did also think about the Ballad of Buster Scruggs. I really do like that, although there are a couple of the shorts that aren't as strong, which is why it didn't completely make my list. But yeah, so those are other ones I thought about. And Lone Survivor, which is a movie like I do like. It's like the sequences of them like falling down the hill is still something that is it hurts to watch. And there were a few films I didn't see yet, like Son of Saul, which I've heard really great things about. And you mentioned Fury. I know we haven't talked about it, but I feel like we should mention American Sniper because that movie made like $1 trillion. I didn't really like that movie, but it was certainly like I think it's certainly one of the more like the well-known films. And then the last one I had was the one Rises, but again, that was more of like tangentially dealing with war rather than actually focusing on it itself. So.
Yeah, American Sniper and Lone Survivor kind of solidified that early calendar release, like in the whatever it was, like right at the end of the year, right at the beginning of the year, that just had a lot of like staying power. They definitely made an impact. If I'm looking around at all the lists that I looked at, we've hit most of everybody's top 5. As far as war movies, I think the only one we didn't mention that was in one of the top 5s was somebody had War Horse at number 5. For the Western ones, there was a film called Sweet Country, which was a blind spot to me. I don't know much about that one. The Sisters Brothers was
I've seen that
listed by one. Sweet Country was listed by a second one, actually, so maybe I should check that out. I don't know. But everything else we've talked about that was in every one of the top 5 lists that we went through. Just real quick, kind of as closing thoughts before we get out of here. What do you think as far as each genre independently, the war genre, the Western genre, as far as the presence it had on the last decade, the direction it's gone as far as how directors, kind of tackle that, or, what do you anticipate for this next decade? Will Westerns or war have a decent impact in the decade overall? We saw a lot more modern stuff too, like we said with the Westerns, stuff like Wind River, Hell or High Water, things of that nature. Does it go more that route? DJ, what do you think? Looking back at the last decade, looking forward to the next decade, how do you think these genres fare?
I think Westerns, in terms of the time frame, are going to still be few and far between. I think the way to get to the Westerns now is to make them like a Wind River or Hell or High Water, make a modern day, a Way of the Gun, a modern day Western, because then you can save. Hollywood doesn't like investing in something that's not going to make $1 billion. If they do, they're going to give you like nothing. So if you make it a modern day Western, you can save a penny, but still hit the feel of a Western, because we talked about these two, Hell or High Water and Wind River. They hit every Western trope for me. And I mean, I grew up on Sergio Leone and, Peck and Paw and all that stuff. So you can do it that way. I see war movies are going to probably do more than a Western, because the Sisters Brothers, which I saw in the theater by myself. So it's a genre that I think has been replaced kind of by the superhero genre, where back in the day, Westerns were kind of like the biggest thing ever. And now you kind of have to do. You're going to get the few and far betweens. You're going to get the slow wests. You got that really good TV series, Godless, on Netflix, which is with Jack O'Connell or whatever, and Jeff Daniels. You're going to get a lot of fringy stuff, but to be in a studio to invest, I think the only way you're going to do it is to modern day Western.
Yeah, I love Western, so I'd love to see more, but it feels like it's few and far between that you get them. A lot of them that we get, I like, but then there's a dime a dozen as far as the ones that are just like these low budget trash Westerns almost.
Right.
It's come out so often that you don't even want to think about. War, it's interesting, Dan. Like, do you see us getting more in the line of stuff like, Zero Dark 30, American Sniper, Lone Survivor, more of these like modern takes or modern, at least based on modern events type thing? Because obviously when we're dealing with war, it can get harder to find new angles, new ways to talk about wars or battles or events that have already been, done a lot. I mean, obviously we saw 1917 prove that, there's more stuff that's untapped out there, but what do you think the future is for war films and Westerns in general?
I think there will always be there because I feel like there's always something different to approach. But it's interesting when you think about like American Sniper was one of the few war films centered on like the war that's going on, the Afghanistan, Iraq combat that was both. It was generally critical. It wasn't like critics loved it, but it was pretty much praised, positively received, and then it was hugely popular. Where we haven't really seen that before. Like even something like Hurt Locker, which won Best Picture, like it made nothing at the box office. And I do wonder, are we going to start ever really seeing, like, you go back when there's so many great Vietnam movies, there's so many great World War II films, but the number of films that kind of take place in the more modern setting are, probably, a handful, if that. So maybe I don't know if we'll get more that we're, further and further
what about
from that. And then
what about
think about
films from, sorry to interject because you're talking about like modern stuff and I'll let you continue your thought, but what about war films based on more non-American war films or even films that predate America? Like we think back to like stuff that came out, I'm not, not necessarily like a Braveheart or a Gladiator or things like that, but like wars of the past or just wars that are from other parts of the globe.
Perhaps I wonder if we're ever going to get, especially not a long time, like those movies that have those massive kind of sets and those massive productions where we don't, everything is CGI now. So I'm not sure. I mean, it's possible, Game of Thrones, and obviously not real, but it has a similar approach, like with like old time, like middle age type of war. I don't know, like it's interesting because you do wonder, like, how will COVID affect filmmakers moving forward? Will they approach things differently? Will we see where people are just like, there's been so much existential dread over the last 12 months or so, thinking like, no, I don't want to add to that. Let me try to make films that are focused on something else. Who knows? Or will we get people trying to do Contagion again? I don't know. We'll see. It's hard to say. Like I think to me the question is like, how much do we get focused on like the right now? And I thinking we're 20 years, since September 11th, that we're going to get now. You think about where a lot of the great Vietnam movies from came out in the 80s or so. So is that when we're going to see a slew of them come out now? That they're a little bit more separated, so people feel like they can say something differently, or they have more perspective, more grander perspective, and we know more information, or even though we're kind of still in it. It's a good question. I don't know.
Yeah. It also seemed like we were the war films of the last decade. We had the World War Ones, the World War Twos, the obviously Beasts of No Nations tackling a completely different, fictional setting, but akin to what's happening in another country. And we got a few of the more modern ones with, stuff Afghanistan and in the Middle East and stuff like that. Not only did we not get stuff that was, predating, American times, but we also didn't get much as far as like the strict American wars, like like the American Revolution, Civil War, things of that nature. It seemed like that was kind of a forgotten aspect of, or that nobody was really interested in doing that. I mean, I guess we had like the Free State of Jones, kind of, I guess, but like
kind of, yeah.
It seemed like there wasn't much attention to some of those things that we've seen done a lot more. Like in the 80s and 90s, we got a lot of those. It seemed like so. I'd just be interested to see what kind of topics they tackle. But Dan, you could be onto something where we're going to get a little bit more of the feel good or positive, or maybe people are going to be a little bit scared to go to the dread of some of these war films. But I still think there's enough to kind of find. I mean, if we found more topics to cover in both World War I and World War II in this last decade, there's obviously more stuff on some of these other wars. So, DJ, why don't you go ahead and give us final thoughts, reactions to anything you've heard over the last few minutes, or also give us a chance here to pimp out how people can listen to more of your stuff.
Ooh, pimp out. No, I'm a huge fan of Westerns. I have a skeptical view on if Hollywood's going to invest in them, but I hope they do, because they're fantastic.
Yeah.
I mean, I think I watch Unforgiven once a year. I'm pretty sure that's on my list. Good, the bad, the ugly is on constant rotation. I really wish, because they're so good. But I know it's not a 4-quadrant type of genre, but I still love them. If you want to hear my ramblings and my co-host, you can find me at simplistic.reviews or search Simplistic Reviews on iTunes, Stitcher, TuneIn, all that other good stuff. Spotify, we're all over the place. Our St. Patrick's Day episode will probably be out right now when this show gets released. So yeah, check that out in our movie commentary for a certain film that I wish was taken away, called Justice League, the Snyder Cut. We'll be doing a commentary for that too.
Did you lose the bed or something? Or? I saw your trailer for it. I thought that was pretty funny. Yeah.
Definitely check
that wasn't a trailer. That was an actual reaction.
Check out Simplistic Reviews and everything they do, and follow DJ on Twitter as well. It's a good follow. Dan, any last thoughts that you didn't get out about the war or the Western genre, or give people not only how they can stay in more touch with what you're doing, but they can not only just hear you on our podcast, but now they can see you as well. So talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, unfortunately, you can see my face if you want to do that. I started because the world needs more comic book YouTube channels. I started my own comic book YouTube channel instead of doing something within the GeekCast radio network, just because it can get lost with all the podcasts. That's the Comic Concierge channel, where I'm kind of just focusing on comics, and I have a few things planned, but right now you'll see some videos of reviews of books I read. And I'm going to try to do all types of books, not just like your weekly releases, but graphic novels and manga and things like that. And there are a lot of comic book channels that focus on things like speculation. I don't care about speculation. I care more about the content. And so I have that going on. And if you want to see more of my stuff, you can check it out there. They're also being put on the GeekCast radio website as well. And you can find myself on Twitter at Concierge Comics, and on Instagram at comic_concierge. So there you go.
Hi. Absolutely. You can follow the show at CinemaGeekCast. You can follow my Twitter at OptimusSolo. I don't have anything to pimp out because I'm trying to spend most of this year doing things behind the scenes so that I can release some content en masse later on. So it's all my dirty plan here to be absent but still working. So you got to do what you got to do when you have a baby. So stay tuned for that, and stay tuned for more episodes of the Cinema Geeks. We will have a couple more episodes talking about the last decade before we're finished with that completely. And then, hey, who knows? Maybe by that point we'll have gone to a theater, because it's been a long time for me. So definitely stay tuned for that. DJ, thank you so much for joining us as always. We appreciate it. So that is it for this episode of Cinema Geeks. Stay tuned for another one coming your way, hopefully very soon.